Namaste everyone. It's really wonderful to be back here. It's like a home away from home. Very warm welcome and it just feels very nice to be back at this very special place. So thank you to everyone for organizing this. And I had sent 2-3 topics and this was selected because I think the suggestion was that we just finished Durga Puja, Vijayadashmi and Kali Puja is coming. So some reflection on the mother symbol. But I want to connect this also with some of Sri Aurobindo's Bengali writings, which I have been again going through in the last month or so for various reasons. And I find it so amazing that some of the things that he wrote during the peak of his revolutionary activities are still so relevant to this day, and how they actually help us connect the individual and the collective sadhana that we all have to do for our own progress, inner progress as individuals, and our own progress as a nation, as a collective. So I thought, why not look at those writings, one or two specific writings in the light of mother's symbol. What mother symbol suggests, at least to me, when I think about it. And its relevance, again, very practical relevance for our individual and collective growth. So, because when Sri Aurobindo says all life is yoga, it has to be really understood in that living spirit, how all life, the life that I am currently living as an individual and as a lover of Mother India, what that means to me. So with that intention, I thought of doing this analysis. So the title, as Subrata Das said, is Recovering the Aryan Spirit. Some reflections on mother symbol. There can be like a whole series of lectures on mother symbol, but I'll just touch upon few brief points. Let me start with one stanza of this beautiful poem that Sri Aurobindo has given us, beautiful prayer, Hymn to Durga. And in that light, we'll start. So this is one of the stanzas from Hymn to Durga. Mother Durga, extend wide the power of yoga. We are thy Aryan children. Develop in us again the lost teaching. Character, strength of intelligence, faith and devotion, force of austerity, power of chastity, and true knowledge. Bestow all that upon the world to help mankind appear. O Mother of the world, dispel all ills. 2-3 things stand out for me when I read this again and again. We are thy Aryan children who seem to have lost some of that teaching, some of that strength of knowledge, some of that character that defined us as children of Mother India. So what is it that we have lost and how we can recover it? And how can Mother be our guide in that recovery process? But in these lines, if one were to read this few more times, we also get a very helpful insight as to who is an Aryan as per Sri Aurobindo. Why did he even call his journal from 1914 to 1921 Arya? So what is this Arya word that he's so, he's so interested in, and he wants us to understand what that Aryan character is. So the way I understand that one stanza, we are thy Aryan children, develop in us again the lost teaching, the power of austerity, the chastity of true knowledge. An Aryan, according to Sri Aurobindo, is one who walks the path of light and right. And that is how the Veda also defines as Arya. The one who walks the Ritasya Pantha, the path of the right, the path of the right. An Aryan is one who plows the inner soil to seek that hidden light which can be his guide in life. He's committed to pursuing a life of high aspiration, high culture. He's keen to grow in wisdom and strength. At one place, Sri Aurobindo defines an Aryan is a perfect synthesis of Brahma Tej and Kshatriya Tej, wisdom and strength. That is what we have lost, and we have to recover that spirit, that character. At another place, he gives, as if characteristics of what it means to live an Aryan life. And let me read his words. These are the characteristics that define an Aryan: liberality, love, courage, energy, and modesty. And to live an Aryan life, the purpose, the aim of an Aryan's life is, in his own words, to spread the light of knowledge among men, to hold before the race the impeccable ideal of elevated liberal characters, to protect the weak, to punish the powerful tyrants. This is the Aryan life that we at one point held so high in our civilization, and we seem to have lost. So when Sri Aurobindo is praying to Mother Durga in his hymn to Durga, "We are thy Aryan children, recover to us that lost teaching." He wants us to recover all of these. Liberality, the liberal values in the truest sense of the word. Energy, modesty, humility, elevated aspiration, high aspiration. What I also find so interesting is that when he was writing in 1909 this hymn to Durga, he was quite deeply aware, cognizant of the fact that the Indian mind, the Indian psyche, and the Indian people had sort of were going through this deep slumber, a state of stupor, which is the lot of a colonized people because of the brutal repression, the brutal oppression that was the British colonial reason. And that's why he felt that only Mother Durga can awaken that spirit. Because if we are sleeping for so long, it is not through mind that we will awaken. Some higher spirit has to descend and to awaken this sleeping Bharat Shakti, to find the lioness that she is, to find that strength that she is. But there is one other interesting thing. Even prior to his hymn to Durga, in many of his earlier Bengali writings also we find his keen awareness of the fact that this decay, this stagnation, this decline that had come upon Indian psyche or Indian people, Indian civilization, was something in making for a very long time. Much before the Europeans had set foot on the Indian soil, that decay had started. And he wanted us to know that, and he wanted us to do a very significant analysis of that. So there is one particular writing in Dharma, again from his Bengali writings, in September 1909, where he does a masterful analysis of what had gone wrong with the Indian spirit, with the Indian psyche, which has to be now recovered. So I want to take us a little bit into the past and then come to the present and the future with the reflections on Mother Symbol, how Mother Symbol can help us move towards a new future. There is so much talk these days about New India, New India. New India is not, only infrastructure and bridges and Vande Bharat trains and bullet trains. All that is important. But New India, with the timeless spirit of what the dharma of this land has been about. So to build a new India, I want to bring us to that Mother Symbol. But I believe it's important to look at the past a little bit and see, have we forgotten this kind of analysis? And because he was like a master, precise surgeon doing that kind of analysis to tell us what went wrong. So in this writing in Dharma, he says that it is surprising, but then he says it's not surprising in some sense, to see that India could succumb to a handful of British merchants within a span of 50 years, when for the last hundreds of years, India had been so successfully resisting against all kinds of Islamic invasions. So what went wrong that within 50 years we could succumb to this state of stupor? And he does this analysis and he says the battle between the British and the Indian of 18th century was not a battle between good and evil. We just celebrated Vijay Dashmi and standard understanding is it's a victory of good over evil. He says the battle between the British and Indian of the 18th century was a battle between two asuras. So to an Indian mind, it would feel, why is Sri Aurobindo calling the Indian of that time also as a representative of an Asuric force? But we have to go deeper into his own analysis to find out. So I'm going to read few passages from that writing. He writes, the country which the mighty Muslims, constantly growing in power, took hundreds of years to conquer with the greatest difficulty and could never rule over in perfect security. That very country in the course of 50 years willingly admitted the sovereignty of a handful of English merchants, and within a century went into an inert sleep under the shadow of their paramount empire. So we need to find out what happened, what was wrong. As I understand this writing, there are two levels on which he analyzes the situation. One is an outer political explanation. One is a deeper psychological explanation which explains why that political outcome was there. So let's first look at the outer political explanation. He says it was the Asuras who fought against the Asuras, but there was a difference between these two Asuras. The British were the nationally conscious and unified Asuras. They were able to defeat the Asuras which were equal to them in all other qualities. So if the Indian Asuras were equal to the British in all other qualities except that they were lacking in these two qualities. They were not nationally conscious and not unified. Right? And then he says, the divine law is such that it is the one who is mighty, who is fast, who is enduring, who is unified, will definitely win a race. If you're in a race, participating in a race, your moral qualities will not help you. How fast you can run, how much perseverance you can have, how much endurance you can exhibit, that is what's going to make the difference. How efficient and how strong and how much fire you would have. India had lost all that, plus the fact that India was also not nationally conscious. He said still, this lack of national consciousness and lack of unity was there even during the Muslim invasions time. And yet we were able to resist. So something was still there that we seem to have lost over a period of time. That's where his deeper psychological analysis really helps. So he says that the British could form an empire because they were a more unified, nationally conscious race. They were strong, efficient, all those things that I said. But the deeper psychological reason is more interesting. India at that time was suffering from two psychological aspects. One, a deep state of tamasic ignorance, and the second, a disorderly, disorganized Rajasic impulse. First, a deep tamasic ignorance. Second, a disorderly, disorganized Rajasic impulse. And he gives examples of that. Now, this Rajasic impulse can actually help gain power, at least the outer Shakti. But with the absence of any sattvic control over it, it can easily fall into a state of exhaustion. And that's where the impotence, inactivity, all that thing starts. So India at that time somehow lacked in a sattvic counterbalance to the Rajasic impulse. And he said this is not something that we've always been a sattvic nation. We've understood the value of sattvic temperament. But over the last thousands of years of fighting, somehow that thirst for knowledge, that thirst for elevation of consciousness in the light of a sattvic ideal, in the light of a sattvic temperament, had been gradually declining. And what we were left with was still a strong Rajasic impulse, but in the absence of the light, the harmony, the balance that Sattva can bring, it would immediately fall back into a state of tamas. That's an amazing way to understand this. Now, British, on the other hand, they did not necessarily understood the spiritual value of a sattvic temperament. But as a nationally conscious people, they were deeply influenced by some ideals that can be understood as sattvic ideals. Sri Aurobindo actually uses the term sattvic ideal. If you can't have sattvic nature, have a sattvic ideal to mold your life. And the British were able to do that. They highly valued ideals such as an orderly life, the ideal of liberty, the ideal of doing good to others, which is what actually got translated by the later sociologists as white man's burden. That they were here, they genuinely believed that they were here to civilize the barbarians. Wherever they went with this intention, that we are here to civilize you people. So this ideal of doing good to others, it was their source of strength. But India, on the other hand, had lost even a sattvic ideal. And this was just, around the 18th century or so. Before that, India had valued many of these things. But what happened was that Sri Aurobindo describes why that happened. Yeah, okay, let me read this passage from him. It's from the same writing. So, around the time of the Muslim invasion, so around 11th century or so, when they were quite at peak, there was still a thirst for knowledge in India. And it was a widespread thirst for knowledge. Everybody wanted to know, but that had started to diminish. And as a result, the outer conduct, the outer religiosity had taken preeminence. बाहर से जो देखना है हम धार्मिक तरीके से कर रहे हैं, conduct कर रहे हैं, and all that is important. The real thirst for who am I or what am I, self-knowledge or yogic realization, all that had started to recede. This was happening at the level of people or seekers of higher knowledge. At the level of the kings, the northern part was primarily battling, like in the Rajputs, there was a lot of infighting going on, which was a constant source of decline of the Rajasic strength. A lot of Rajasic impulse was getting disorganized because of constant infighting. Sri Aurobindo says much of the Bengal had come under the declining phase of Buddhism, which led to further tamas in the Bengali mind. And I don't want to use the word aggressive in a negative sense, but the strength of the Sanatan spirit escaped to southern India. And there we had a revival of sorts in the form of Vijayanagar Empire from 14th century onwards up to 17th, 18th century. But the north and the eastern and other parts of India were reeling under this lot of disorderly Rajasic impulse. From time to time, even during the Mughal invasions, the beauty of Sanatan spirit is that from time to time, we had great saints, great souls bringing new life, bringing new awakening. It came in the form of Shankara, Chaitanya, Nanak, Ramdas. So many people came. But Sri Aurobindo's analysis is that the problem was so deep-rooted that even the best light that came from people like these, who came to awaken the nation, it brought down that light and converted into the worst. So he gives a very beautiful explanation. He says that the current of Rajas and Tamas was so strong that by its pull, even the best was altered into the worst. And he gives examples. How did that happen? So ordinary people began to justify their tamasic nature with the knowledge given by Shankara. All world is मोह माया, कुछ नहीं करना, दुनिया जैसे चल रहा है, जो रूल कर रहे हैं, we are happy, my little family is happy, ये सब मोह माया है, गोविंद भजो, and that tamasic activity was justified under the name of Shankara's teaching. Chaitanya's path of bhakti and love, that was used as another excuse. Sri Aurobindo uses, it became a cover for extreme tamasic inactivity. And then, of course, as I said, among the ruling classes, all this infighting that was going on, not just in the Rajputs earlier, later on in the Marathas. So the grand empire that Shivaji and Baji Rao had built under the guidance of Ramdas, again Kshatriya, ruled by guided by the Sattvic light of Ramdas, that also got destroyed because of the infighting, right? We've seen that after Baji Rao, there were one or two attempts by the, to bring Marathas back, but still they could not come back. So this was the situation that had came to really a peak in the 18th century. So this decline of Aryan spirit, this decline of Aryan dharma that was going on for the last maybe 1,000 years or so came to at its peak in 18th century. And Sri Aurobindo says it was this eclipse of the Aryan dharma that made Indian mind or Indian psyche also as an asuric character. And so by the time the British took hold, it was a battle between two asuras. The good thing on the British side was that they had a national consciousness. India at that time lacked in national consciousness. So they could be easily conquered by the British. But the question is today, how does it help us today? Today, we can't say after 78 years that we are not nationally conscious. At least on the surface, we say that there is a great Indian consciousness in us, and it shows itself again and again every time there is a cricket match or India-Pakistan war or something or the other, it just comes out. Hum Bharatiye hain and all that, a sense of pride. But Sri Aurobindo, being Sri Aurobindo, would always qualify that. He says that alone will not do the trick. There has to be something else. And that something else, because it has to be that sattvic element. Otherwise, national consciousness is a very rajasic quality. Pride, chauvinism, right? So, to make it sattvic, you have to add the dose of patriotism to it. But this is again not a patriotism of the mind. Patriotism, he says, is a quality of the heart. And the deeper heart, which has to have a very strong spiritual foundation. This is where Indian view of nationalism or patriotism is fundamentally different from the Western view of looking at nation, looking at nationalism, looking at patriotism. And unfortunately, we don't talk about these things in our schools and colleges. We only study the Western theories of nationalism and, nation building. So we end up creating more confusions in the younger generations. So that's why when they say the age of nationalism is over, yes, even Sri Aurobindo says this. If you look at his 5 dreams that were broadcasted on All India Radio on 14th August 1947, when he talks about world unity, he says, this is a dream, this is something in the future that will happen when nationalism would have done its work. There still may be a work for nationalism to do, but that nationalism, when seeped in, what Sri Aurobindo says, it has to be seeped in the adoration of the mother. It's not just, I am patriotic because I was born in this land and because I've read all the great authors who were born in this land. No, it has to be founded in Sri Aurobindo's words, adoration of the mother. Who is this mother that Sri Aurobindo is speaking of? Okay, it can be Mother India, but then if you go deeper into understanding Sri Aurobindo, Mother India, who is Mother India? Mother India is one of the embodiments who carries all the splendor, all the glory of that supreme divine mother, who is the mother of all, who is the universal Shakti, who is the transcendent Adya Shakti, who runs, who manages, who moves in all. Mother India is not separate from that divine mother. This whole play is he and she, Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri. Right? So Mother India is not something cut off from any of this divine play of he and she. So it is same in one specific form, it is same as the Adi Shakti. So it's the adoration of mother that has to be the foundation of patriotism, according to Sri Aurobindo. And that's the part that was just so moving for me, and that's where I want to connect it with mother's symbol. So how do we adore the mother? And the Aryan, as I said at the beginning, Aryan is one who walks the path of light, Ritasya Pantha. Aryan is one who invokes all the four powers that are there in the mother symbol. The power of Maheshwari, the power of wisdom, the power of strength, courage, the power of Mahakali, the power of Mahalakshmi, which is the power of harmony, beauty, joy, love, and finally the power of detailed perfection in action, which is the power of Mahasaraswati. Sri Aurobindo writes in another writing that this is the age that we are a part of, the age of transition. It's a transitionary age, but it is also the age of Shakti and love. And he does again another, you think of all sociological, anthropological analysis, and all that is there, and Sri Aurobindo is there. He defeats everyone. So Sri Aurobindo writes, if you look at the world movements in religio-spiritual thought, you'll understand this more. So at the start of this age of transition, or the Kali Yuga, transitioning to a new Satya Yuga, you had the rise of Buddhism, with its key emphasis on compassion, charity, friendliness. Then you have Christianity, spreading the message of love. In the Indian tradition, we had the rise of Bhakti movement, the Puranic Hinduism, all emphasizing devotion, love, adoration of the deity. And then you had Islam coming up again with a message of equality and brotherhood. All these spiritual, religious movements, and starting at this age of transition, spread the message of love in their own way. But there was something lacking. And now the time has come that whatever was lacking or whatever was left behind, it has to be brought back. And what was left behind was the first two aspects of the mother's force, the four petals of the mother's aspects, which was the thirst for knowledge, the wisdom, the Maheshwari aspect, and the Mahakali aspect, and also the Mahasaraswati aspect. So it was the Mahalakshmi aspect that had done its work, spreading the message of love, and it did a lot of good to the humanity. But the Aryan Dharma is that everything has to be integrated. And Aryan, a Sanatan Dharmic approach would be nothing has to be left behind, because everything is part of the divine. It's not that divine is only love, divine is also courage. Divine is not Shiva, divine is also Rudra, right? So all this has to be integrated. Hence, all the four aspects of the mother have to be synthesized. So when Sri Aurobindo says adoration of the mother has to be the foundation of patriotism for recovery of the Aryan spirit, it is this adoration he's talking about. as I understand it, that we invoke all these powers of the mother. By invoking, I mean we try to cultivate all these powers in us. We cultivate a thirst for knowledge, higher wisdom. We cultivate the ability to face challenges in life with strength and courage. Not all of us have to become soldiers and guard the borders, but in other ways we stand up for what is true, what is right, the Kshatriya power. Then the Mahalakshmi aspect, the love, harmony, abundance, money, conquering the money power is the work of the Mahalakshmi also. We just had Lakshmi Puja, the Sharad Purnima in Bengal, and where I come from, Deepavali is the Lakshmi Puja. So all the mothers, for ages, we have been invoking these powers, but we have to now do it in a much more conscious way and put it at the service of the Mother India. That's the Aryan spirit. And finally, the one thing which often gets ignored is the perfection in work, the execution in details. Sometimes I think we Indians are very good at making big dreams and talking of big plans, we'll do this, we'll do that. But to convert that into action, even if it is a small gathering of bringing 5 people together, it requires consistent, persevering will, executive ability to do that, right? That we don't value as much. And we are also, at least my observation is, we start and then we leave things in between. Move on to another big plan. Yeah, right? So that's lack of Mahasaraswati effectivity, efficiency. And these are certain things we can actually learn from the West. The detailed perfection in execution. So that's very important. And Mother tried to bring this in the ashram. Actually, if you look at the history of how ashram departments came to be, it is pure Mahasaraswati at work. Each and every detail, how close attention she was paying to everything, it is the power of Mahasaraswati. Every little detail, there is a story of when certain things were not available, how she would guide, or in her own personal, life, when a certain handkerchief was torn, how she had told her attendant not to throw it away. But if it had to be thrown away, a prayer of gratitude was offered to the handkerchief that, you've given me service for so long. So it's this detailed attention. That is Mahasaraswati's power. So the first thing that I want to propose, or I want to say this mostly for my own understanding also, that we have to cultivate the integration of all these 4 aspects. If we have to recover the spirit that we seem to have lost, the Aryan spirit that Sri Aurobindo analyzed so beautifully in that earlier Bengali writing. Now, if this is the foundation, the 4 powers, we also need some guide lampposts along the way. This is a huge work. It's an intense tapasya to cultivate all the 4, to invoke all these 4 aspects of the Mother. And as beautiful as this symbol of the Mother is, there are these 12 petals which Sri Aurobindo says are essential to cultivate for full manifestation of Mother's work. We all know what those 12 attributes or 12 soul values, soul qualities that we must bring in, that we must cultivate within if we have to be able to carry on any aspect of Mother's work. And if we have to grow as instruments that she can use for her work. Again, when I say Mother, it is our Mother and also Mother India, because there is no separation between the two in that sense. It is because I think Sri Aurobindo, why there is another writing, Bhavani Mandir, you may have heard about it, very early, 1905. Actually, that was also confiscated by the British. They thought it was quite a dangerous pamphlet. In Bhavani Mandir, Sri Aurobindo writes, see, in 1905, even at that time, he was so aware of India's work for the future of humanity. And he says, there he uses this very interesting phrase. He says, India's work is to help the world get rid of barbarism. And he uses the Indian word, malechhood, the Malecha Shakti, the Malech, impure characteristic, the impurity, which is making the mind barbaric. India's work is to help the world get rid of the Malechhood and to Aryanize the people. But he says, for doing this, India has to first re-Aryanize herself. So we cannot claim to do anything for the world if we don't do it first ourselves. So, it is actually very important to know why, when the word Arya was so maligned much before, as if preempting that, Sri Aurobindo was already telling the humanity, telling the world, what is the correct way to understand the word Arya? What does it mean? And this is the part that we seem to have forgotten so easily. So Sri Aurobindo there writes that we have to first re-Aryanize herself. And my submission, my humble understanding is that by working on ourselves with each of these 12 qualities as guidance from the mother, we can slowly cultivate that Aryan characteristic in us. So instead of 12, I will just take 2 or 3 examples of, we know it starts with, mother has given the different order of 12 qualities differently at different places, but typically we understand it starting with sincerity. She says that is the first thing. So, sincerity, humility, gratitude, that's the third. Gratitude, perseverance, aspiration, receptivity, progress, courage, goodness, generosity, peace, and equality. Equality and then peace. Equality you can also substitute with equanimity, because it's not just social equality, but it is the equality within. But at one place, Sri Aurobindo explains that the first 8 qualities are more concerning the attitude we should have towards the divine, and the last 4, starting with goodness, generosity, equality, and peace, are the qualities we should cultivate with regard to our attitudes towards humanity. But again, human and divine are not essentially 2 separate things. But so I want to just take 2-3 examples from this list and share with you how I understand these qualities can help us as guidance on our path to recover that Aryan spirit. So let me start with sincerity. Sincerity, mother says, is the key to the doors to the divine. If yoga is nothing but change of consciousness, or if yoga or sadhana is nothing but practical psychology, sincerity is the first prerequisite for that. And when somebody asked the mother, what is the one, if she were to identify one key problem facing India, what would it be? She said, insincerity. And what would be the one thing needed to progress and to make India what India is supposed to be for the world, for the humanity? She said sincerity. And sincerity, again, from an individual perspective, it is through that we progress. That means no room for any hypocrisy, duplicity, pretension. And the moment we say, now I have attained 100% sincerity, that means that this statement itself is the sign of insincerity. Right? So at the individual level, it's easier to understand what sincerity. Understand, not practice. It's a sadhana to practice sincerity at every step of the way, to be sure that whatever I am saying has no duplicity in it, has no hypocrisy in it, and whatever I'm saying is exactly what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, that itself is a sadhana. I was just reading yesterday one conversation of the mother when somebody asked her about something to do with how we talk, and mother said, if only every day when you get up in the morning and you say, today I am not going to say anything without first stepping back and thinking that whatever I am about to say is absolutely true. If you can only practice this, that itself will be a sadhana of speech. So she just said, try to do that for a day and see how difficult it is. So when you say that I don't tell a lie, or when you say that she's telling the disciple, it's not as simple as that. So try to do it one day and we'll know how, she has actually written about this austerity of speech. In fact, that's again very interesting way to look at it. Mother's essay on 4 austerities and 4 liberations. When you look at the 4 austerities that she speaks of, austerity of knowledge, austerity of love, austerity of beauty, and austerity of, there is one more, but they all have to do with these 4 powers of the mother. Beauty is the physical one, love is the power, there is austerity of power. So austerity of power is the vital one, austerity of beauty has to do with the physical, which is the Mahasaraswati, as I was explaining. The beauty of austerity of love is the austerity of psychic, the Mahalakshmi aspect. Then austerity of knowledge is the Maheshwari, the power of Maheshwari, and the austerity of, what was the 4th one? Knowledge, love, power, and beauty. So all 4 aspects are covered there. That was just an example that to be sincere in our speech, even for a day, that can be sadhana. But when it comes to the collective life, now again it's important because Sri Aurobindo constantly reminds what is true of the individual is true of the collective also. So it is not that different set of rules will apply to collective progress. Same truths will apply to collective progress as well. So what is true of the individual has to be true of the nation also. If insincerity is a huge sadhana it's a huge challenge that we have to overcome as individuals, same thing is true for the nation as well. Where actually the problem is even more challenging, because here you are dealing with collective mind. So when we talk about let's say where there is a national issue that we have to discuss and debate, what is the basis on which we put forth our argument? Usually opinions gained from newspaper, from TV debates, from social media, from addas, from discussing with ourselves. No individual questioning, no individual reading, no individual thinking that is going on, but simply an opinion sharing and contradicting each other and having great time discussing, thinking that our discussions are somehow helping the nation to move forward. No, it is just, as we say in India, complete time pass. It does not serve any purpose, right? This is also an insincerity on our part as children of Mother India, but we don't see it like that. So any discussion, any debate, especially when nations go through a period of crisis, and we have an example from Mother's own conversation during one of the war, 1965 war, when somebody in the ashram had written to the mother or said something that, don't you think our Prime Minister should do this? Mother said, shh. She said that, it's there in the collected words. She said, shh, silence. You should not criticize unless you know better. You could have done something differently if you were in the Prime Minister's role. If you don't know anything, don't say anything. This is not the time to criticize, she said. So whenever there is a crisis, we actually get more animated and we become critics of our government's decision, our government's policies. Why? Because we think we are being democratic citizens, we have a right to do that. But essentially, from a spiritual perspective, it is an insincere act on our part. Rather than putting our strength and pure aspiration for the challenge to be resolved, for the crisis to be resolved, rather than putting our energy on that side, we end up doing the other thing. This is an insincerity. So, again, from a national point of view also, sincerity can be a great aid to work towards recovering of the Aryan spirit. And I just want to read one example from the mother, which I find personally very valuable as a guide. There are many things she said on sincerity. In fact, one time I got a compilation from Mother India office, 400 pages they had compiled on everything Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said on the value of sincerity. So it's something they have really given a lot of value. But there is one reminder that I like to share at this point. She said, if we allow a falsehood, however small, to express itself through our mouth or our pen, how can we hope to become perfect messengers of truth? A perfect servant of truth should abstain even from the slightest inexactitude. That everything has to be exact. Even the slightest inexactitude we should be abstaining from, slightest exaggeration or deformation. So this is the aspect of Mahasaraswati helping us to become perfect, sincere instruments. Not a single exaggeration should come out of my mouth or from my pen. I mean, this can put every op-ed writer out of business, right? Because that's what they are so good at, spinning mass stories. So that's just one example, sincerity from Mother's symbol. Next, I'll take up courage. That again was something Sri Aurobindo has written a lot about courage. And in one place he says, if every soul value somehow disappears, and courage and love are the two things that remain, we can revive the entire, soul strength back. So what is courage? There's this line from Savitri, right? Courage their armor, faith their sword, they must walk in light. So courage and faith go together. Now, from an individual perspective, again, let's not talk about the soldiers, whom we would typically identify as the ones who exhibit this quality of courage. The challenges we face in our life on a day-to-day basis. To meet those challenges, we need a lot of courage. The first level of courage, as I understand, is needed to understand why am I facing this disappointment in life. It usually, at least from what I have experienced, little that I have experienced and observed, I have come to understand that a lot of it is there because we do not learn how to let go of our own preferences, our own ideas of how things should be, my own mind and vitals preference. This is what I wanted from life, this is what I should get. And if I don't get it, I'm going to feel dejected. I'm not going to trust that maybe divine has a different plan for me. To accept this itself needs courage. Because whether we are conscious of it or not, when Sri Aurobindo says all life is yoga, he's saying even all life is consciously or subconsciously a yoga. If we are not conscious, nature is anyway helping us walk the path of yoga, but in a subconscious way. To recognize that nature as a humble executive power of the divine is leading me through this path of subconscious progress, subconscious growth, I need a lot of courage to have that trust in divine's plan, in nature's plan for me. So that is the first level of courage. Many of you have seen when we go to Mother's room, Sri Aurobindo's room, there is a beautiful statement of the Mother, cling to truth on the staircase. Right? You've Some of you have seen it. Every time I pass that, I say to myself that there are two things Mother has not said before clinging to truth. First of all, clinging to truth requires a lot of courage to cling to truth, because as I just read, not a single inexactitude or exaggeration should come from, not a single falsehood should come from my mouth or from my pen. So to cling to truth requires a lot of courage. So I kind of have a little joke with myself. Mother forgot to mention, you need to be very strong and courageous to cling to truth. The second part that I think she wants us to know this ourselves, at least to me I understand it, that you need to keep your temple clean so that truth will find a way to get in. Right? Again, that's a work of sincerity. So when we look at these 12 attributes, they are actually, just for our classification purpose, we call them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are all interconnected. Right? So to cling to truth requires courage, and it also requires a lot of inner purification, which is the work of sincerity. Right? So that's what I think true courage would be. Courage with a lot of trust that Mother is guiding my path. Whenever disappointments happen, that there is something that she wants me to learn from this, I pick myself up, I dust my clothes, and I cling back to the truth. That is the courage that she wants us to develop in ourselves. Again, at the national level, same thing would apply, that what it means to stand courageously in the face of falsehood that is bombarded day in and day out through our popular media, through our social media, and we hold on to truth. Many times we give in because we want to be popular, we want to be accepted in the popular discourse of the day. That's a lack of courage, also a lack of sincerity, right? So, same thing would apply there. I want to read one line from the Mother, again, the idea of courage. So, especially at the level of collective nation, collective societies, we say yes, there is so much bad stuff happening around us. So much ugliness, so much chaos, violence, disorderliness. How do I maintain that true connection with the soul of India when I see all this ugliness around me? How do I keep this? That again is an act of courage. And Mother has given a wonderful reminder here and a wonderful advice for us to follow in our sadhana again as individuals, and then apply it in our collective life as well. So this is what she writes. This is again the work of a warrior, actually, a soul warrior. She says, we must face life as a whole. So when, I'm just digressing a little bit, when cinema was started in the ashram playground, when it was decided that children will be shown movies in the ashram playground, somebody had asked this question of the Mother, that why are we showing films to ashramites and to children? Mother said, by not doing this, we are helping them, are we helping them escape from the reality of the world? That's also not going to help them in any way. They have to be ready to face the challenges of the world. So in that context, she mentioned this. We must face life as a whole, with all the ugliness, falsehood and cruelty it still contains. But we must take care to discover in ourselves the source of all goodness, all beauty, all light and all truth, in order to bring this source, the source of all light, all beauty, all truth, to bring this source consciously into contact with the world so as to transform it. So again, this is the work of a samurai. One of my favorite writings, early writings of Sri Aurobindo, is The Samurai and the Bourgeois. He says we have become too bourgeois, too comfortable in our middle class lives. We need to have the attitude of the samurai, the warrior, So face life with all its ugliness, but find that constant source of beauty and truth. So that's about courage. And then finally, the third quality that I want to mention briefly is from the last four, goodness. Because goodness is very closely connected with the Aryan spirit. And this again, I try not to deviate much from Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's writings, because everything that at least in my journey I need to learn, I find my answers in their words. So goodness, we generally think of it as being nice, pleasant, feel good, all that. But Sri Aurobindo says goodness, the way we truly, this word goodness it is actually an Aryan quality. And Sri Aurobindo has written one small essay on Bhartrihari, the king who was the older brother of King Vikramaditya, of Vikram and Betal fame, some of the younger children may know. Bhartrihari had written several texts, Shringar Shatkam, Niti Shatkam, Vairagya Shatkam, 100 verses on each of these. But it was the Niti Shatkam which Sri Aurobindo rated very highly, and he translated. It was a Sanskrit text, and he translated those 100 verses. They came to be known as Century of Life. So Niti Shastra in Indian tradition is about, policy, teaching Niti strategies to live a good life, to live a noble life. So Niti Shastras were used as treatises for education of princes and administrators and warriors. So it was this in this context of Niti Shatkam of Bhartrihari, he wrote an essay on outer life of Bhartrihari and his significance to the Indian literary tradition, the contribution that he made. And there is a beautiful legend about King Bhartrihari, how he became, what he became. But anyway, in that context, he defines Aryanness or goodness. And this is so important because today we live in times where we have a phrase called virtue signaling, right? That certain values are considered good values, we must all have those, and certain values are considered regressive, archaic, inka to time hi nikal gaya, Karwa Chauth, what is that, why celebrate, all that is an old regressive values. But certain, and we have words like woke, right? They'll try to say this is the right way this is what it means to be liberal in today's world. This is the woke. So in that context, it's really important to revisit some of these truths that we have from masters like Sri Aurobindo. And I'm going to read that one paragraph from that essay on Bhartrihari that he wrote. And he said this Niti Shataka, Bhartrihari Niti Shataka, was a work of literature that both describes and can help mold the national character into the Aryan character. And there he defines, who is the Aryan? Why do we need this as an Indian character? The Aryan man is he who observes in spirit and letter the received code of a national morality, which included, now these are the characteristics that we must cultivate. The higher niceties of etiquette, the bold and chivalrous temper of a knightly and martial aristocracy. That's the samurai, the warrior, the highest chivalrous temper of a knight, a samurai, a martial aristocracy. The general obligations of truth, honor, and high feeling. And crowning all of these, such great ideals of the Vedic and Buddhistic religion, which include sweetness, forbearance is endurance, titiksha, that's the word we use in the Upanishads, forgiveness, charity, self-conquest. You want to conquer the world? First conquer yourself. That is what all our Shastras have said. Sweetness, forbearance, forgiveness, charity, self-conquest, calm, self-forgetfulness. It is the self with the small s, the ego self, forgetfulness, self-immolation, which means self-giving, sacrifice, surrender, as had entered deeply into the national imagination. So he was writing in the context that Bhartrihari reminded through his Niti Shatakams that we must cultivate all of these qualities, which Sri Aurobindo says are the Aryan qualities, but they are the ones that at one point defined our national character. So if this is what goodness means, this is what we must be cultivating. So just I've taken these 3 examples of sincerity, courage and goodness. But humility is another so important one. Generosity is another so much important. Oh, everything is important. But these 12 can be our little guide lamps on the way as we go closer and closer to cultivate and integrate the 4 aspects of the mother. And if you pay close attention to the mother symbol, where the first, say Maheshwari, the 3 values that come on top of that, you will see the connection. So one can actually meditate on the mother symbol for so long and still come out with this that I have not understood anything. But it's the sadhana of the symbol itself that can really help us progress. So this is what I thought I would share, that we don't have to go anywhere outside to recover this lost national character, lost Aryan spirit that Sri Aurobindo was speaking of in his hymn to Durga. But just reflect on mother symbol and use that as our guiding post. So I'll just finish with 2 more stanzas from hymn to Durga. One which comes just before the first one that I started with, we are thy Aryan children, and one that comes after that, because together all 3 make perfect sense. So this is what Sri Aurobindo writes. We can just see how true that is today. Mother Durga, India lies low in selfishness and fearfulness and littleness. Make us great, make our efforts great, our hearts vast, make us true to our resolve. May we no longer desire the small, void of energy, given to laziness, stricken with fear. And then he writes, recover to us the lost teaching of the Aryan character. And the third one he says, Mother Durga, slay the enemy within, the self-conquest. Then root out all the obstacles outside. First become Swarat, then you are ready to become Samrat. May the noble, heroic, mighty Indian race, supreme in love and unity, truth and strength, arts and letters, force and knowledge ever dwell in its holy woodlands, its fertile lands, under its skyscraping hills, along the banks of its pure streaming rivers. This is our prayer at the feet of the Mother. Make thyself